Okay. Ja, alles klar. Dann begrüße ich euch ganz herzlich heute zu einer weiteren Veranstaltung zu Leben, Werk und Wirkung von Albert O. Hirschman. Mein Name ist Alex Karschnia. Ich organisiere das hier zusammen mit der Stiftung Kommunikationsaufbau. Es gibt einen Albert O. Hirschman-Preis, Voice. Das ist der Grund auch für diese Reihe. Der wird dieses Jahr zum zweiten Mal verliehen, und zwar schon bald, am 7. November hier im TAG. Und heute widmen wir uns ganz besonders einem Aspekt von einer etwas merkwürdigen Aktualität von Hirschman, über die wir gleich zu sprechen kommen. Aber jetzt werde ich auf Englisch kurz umswitchen und wollte euch kurz fragen, ob ihr bereit seid für eine gemischte Veranstaltung Englisch-Deutsch oder ob es Leute gibt, die gerne eine Übersetzung hätten und ob das jemand von euch im Publikum machen würde. Ich werde das. I will speak now in English, and we have a guest is an English speaker. I will translate the other guests for him, but Jeremy Adelman will speak in English. So please let's welcome Jeremy Adelman. He was here before the very first time we were talking about Albert Hirschman. It was last April. The first and you were here and gave us a little introduction into the life of Albert O. Hirschman. You wrote a little book about Hirschman, which is 700 or 800 pages, Worldly Philosopher, The Odyssey of Albert O. Hirschman. And after our talk, we went to a restaurant and had dinner. And shortly before you left, you were challenging us. And you said, well, it's very interesting to talk about Hirschman. He's such a progressive thinker, but be aware, there's also other people who like to read Hirschman. It's the right-wing libertarians. They also love Hirschman. And back then, that wasn't so well known, but in these days, we could read about these weird fans of Albert O. Hirschman. One example would be an article by Naomi Klein and Esther Taylor about end-time fascism. And she does mention that some of the people who are behind the Trump government or supporting the Trump government were fans of Hirschman. But she doesn't explain too much why. It has to do with a book that I had the pleasure to have to be an editor of a new edition that we publish here in the Christoph Links Verlag of Exit, Voice and Loyalty, which is like the most well-known book, and a lot of people only know the title, but it is a very, very well-known book in the English-speaking world, especially of social science. Like there is an Albert O. Hirschman Prize, for example, in the US that is for social science. Let me briefly introduce the other guest, because we have somebody from social science here with who I have been talking about Hirschman as well. It's Dirk Baecker. Dirk Baecker is a sociologist. He studied with Niklas Luhmann. His work is a lot about organization theory and management, especially complexity management and risk. You wrote tons of books. One of your series is called Wozu? Why? So, wozu Kultur, wozu Theorie, wozu Wirtschaft, wozu Universität? And today we can talk about wozu Theater und wozu Hirschman, wozu Trump. Da werden wir bestimmt auch noch drauf kommen. So I'm really happy to have you here, Dirk Baecker, with us. I also can mention how we met. We met being both actors for Christoph Schlingensief in 1999. Abschied von Deutschland. You gave a little speech, I gave a little speech. That's how we met. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about this, also about of management theory, because Hirschman, of course, is in the first place an economist. You know, he studied economy in Paris and other places, and here, yeah. And eventually came back to Berlin and spent quite some time here also in the city. And we talk about this a little bit later. And Maike Weißpflug, some of you know her because you've been here at least twice when we were talking about this book, when the first prize was presented. And we talked here the last time in April together with Klaus Leggevi, Klaus Lederer, and Justus von Daniels from Korrektiv, who were the ones who won the first Hirschman Prize Voice last year. And Maike had a very good impulse to talk about exit, voice, and loyalty. Because exit and voice are so prominent concepts, and a lot of people like to talk about them. We call the prize voice. We will hear a lot about exit and the fans of exits among the Trumpists. And then you had the question, isn't maybe loyalty a concept that in times when democracy is challenged by the right wing, we should discuss, also as progressive. So that's why this talk is called No Exit, Only Voice. What does loyalty to democracy mean? Because Maike made a feature about it. What is loyalty to democracy? But why is it called No Exit, Only Voice? Very short introduction. There is, among the people who read Hirschman, is a man called Patty Friedman. He is the nephew of Milton Friedman, who was actually also discussed by Albert O. Hirschman. He was quite in disagreement with a lot of the things he wrote. Patty Friedman is mentioned, so I keep showing these books. In this book, right, Quinn Slobodium, Kapitalismus ohne Demokratie, it's actually in English, I think, much better titled, Crack Up Capitalism, because Patty Friedman is one of those people who want to crack up capitalism into small entities, like his model would be Singapore, for example, or Dubai. And for this to argue why the nation state or bigger nation state maybe should be broken down to those entities, he was quoting Albert O. Hirschman. And he said, well, this is an option of exit. No, we should have an option to exit. And if we don't like to live in Berlin, we go to Singapore. But that doesn't necessarily mean democracy. So some of the people that were reading his stuff, like a blogger called Menecius Mouldboug, we all wouldn't know about this man, probably if it wasn't for people like Peter Thiel, who's a big fan, financed him a lot. He also read Hirschman and said he thinks that states should be run like companies. And in companies, there wouldn't be democracy as well. A CEO would be like a monarch, so maybe we should have a monarchy. Maybe like Prussia. Interesting enough, this man thinks that the enlightened dictatorship of Prussia would be a great model for a state, and there would be no voice, only exit. So you shouldn't have democracy, but you have the freedom to leave. And isn't that the most basic freedom we need? That's the model of a person like mentioned Mouldboug, big fan, as I said, Peter Thiel, who thinks that democracy and freedom, they no longer go hand in hand. And actually, the exit that they propose is an exit from democracy. If you want to read more, there's another fan of mentioned Mouldboug, it's called Nick Land. He's very popular among artists. I wouldn't, as you see, I got it from the university, from the library. Don't buy necessarily this book, because Okkultes Denken is quite a heavy reading, and it's quite open that they dream in an essay called Dark Enlightenment, where a lot of Mouldboug is quoted. It's all about exit, and it ends in a very racist fantasy. So there's a very dark reading of Hirschman that we think has nothing to do with the real Hirschman. Hirschman was really a progressive. They are anti-progressive. They started a movement. They call themselves neo-reactionaries. So there's a neo-reactionary movement, NRX, it even has a code, where they read Hirschman in this respect, and it's a complete misreading and a misunderstanding of Hirschman. But there's somebody who can tell you much more about this, somebody who is very knowledgeable about Hirschman, like most people who report on these developments are not. That's Jeremy Adelman. So Jeremy, the floor is yours for the No Exit, Only Voice.
Though there are exits, so hopefully our voices won't lead you to run for the exits here. Well, thank you, Alex. Just maybe to kick things off, one of the things I would say is that that Hirschman was never very settled on exit, voice, and loyalty. It was an unstable triangle for him. because it was not completely resolved, which lends itself to being appropriated and read with highly motivated reasons, especially by reactionaries. And there's no question that Hirschman was a social democrat. He was a progressive, but another reason why, let's say, neo-reactionaries can read him and take some of his ideas is because he was reading, let's say, conservative thinkers. There is something also internally unstable about Hirschman, or not conservative thinkers. He was, I'll get to it in just a moment. It depends how you want to categorize him, but Friedrich Hayek was very important for Hirschman. And so some of those seeds you can see in the way the Peter Thiels of the world are now harvesting their fruit. So no exit is kind of the framing for this. But of course, there are exit fantasies all over the place. I mean, there's the exiting of marriages, the exiting to new frontiers, let's say the American West being frontier, or space being a new frontier. It's a recurrent in our culture. There are, of course, and there are exits all over the place. The rise of the nation state in the 19th century would be inconceivable without the exit option, because national states produced exiles. And we could list the many that came from Germany, starting with Marx himself. And Berlin itself would be a city of destination for many exiles. Indeed, Albert Hirschman, just to go into the character that we're going to, who's the pretext for this conversation, went to the French Gymnasium. He was born in Berlin in 1915 and went to the French Gymnasium here in Berlin, which was, of course, established by Huguenot refugees from France who had come to Germany. So exile has been sewn into the fabric of nation states from the very beginning. And of course, the number of Russians and Turks and other forms of refugees in our day, stateless people who seek asylum, is only growing. So no exit, but I'll come back to that in just a minute, doesn't literally mean there is no exit, though there is a way in which there are no more exits now in another fashion, which I'll come back to. So Hirschman was always interested in this phenomenon, and how exit was sewn into the way we constructed social categories like nation states and even international laws. But its recent appeal, the idea of exit, Alex has given us a bit of the tour now of how the landscape of reactionary thought has picked up on this idea of the necessity of exit as part of a disenchantment with the fundamental institutions that were built up over the course largely of the 20th century, are now arguing that we've talked about reform, we've talked about reinventing things like government, they don't work, and now it's time to leave, to leave these institutions. And if we can't leave them, and this was that brief, very fevered moment in the United States where I, by the way, no longer live, though I still have an American and a Canadian passport, exit in case I need to, but was when the exiteers moved into the federal government of the United States to smash it up, under the moment in which Elon Musk was still allied closely with Donald Trump. So in a way, there was this moment in which exit came in to smash it, to crack it up, actually, and that was the intention. Of course, it didn't last very long, and it didn't work. But more the appeal to the libertarian dreams, though, just to add more to what Alex said, is, of course, the colonization of Mars, as and the idea of space exploration for the possibility of departure has been sewn into the modern imaginary and is now gaining new traction. creation of, or purchase and creation of island sanctuaries in case there's a calamity. One might call this the Elysium option. There's a film that is kind of a trope literature about how the rich create an extraplanetary system where they can live without poor people, without the extractive economy that takes place on Earth. This features who starred Jodie Foster and well, anyway, it's called Elysium. It's a sort of dystopian vision of the future. In fact, it's all about American healthcare, if you think about it, because the ultimate thing that they have on Elysium, this constructed entity outside the planet, are MRI machines to diagnose what's happening to human bodies that the vast majority of humans don't have access to. So this Elysium idea that you can construct the perfect planet outside Earth upon which people can live. And if you read, we could add to Alex's stack over here, Douglas Rushkoff's darkly hilarious, you've got it there, yes, Survival of the Richest. Yeah, what's the subtitle there, Alex?
Warum wir vor den Tech-Milliardären noch nicht einmal auf dem Mars sicher sind. We're not even safe on Mars.
It's a real eye-opener. And it's an ethnographic study. So he's a kind of a media thinker, communications writer, very funny writer, who is brought in to advise the richest on their strategies for escaping the great calamity, how they should build their bunkers, and it would be a very, very comedic read if it were not so real that these guys really think they can get away from the disaster that's going to affect all of the rest of us. So exit is sewn into the new fantasy-scape of this social class, and this brand of thinkers. We can perhaps come back to them in the discussion. This is, of course, and Alex has said this is a misreading of Hirschman. A little bit of background on the book that Alex has published on Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. Hirschman writes that book in the late 1960s. It's a very specific historic moment. One thing to note about the book, and Alex and I were on a Zoom conversation the other day, he reminded me that I had reminded him and others the last time I was here, was that the title is really important. It's Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. Maybe the most important word in the title is and. It's not or. It's not that social actors are committed to one or the other. They all have all three brewing inside us, each one of us. And they have effects on other strategies. That's something maybe we can come back to. But if you read it only as the exit is the option when the other two don't work, which is the Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, etc. fantasy-scape, they've changed the title of the book. We call it Exit, Voice, or Loyalty, and they are choosing the or towards exit. Just a couple of, we can talk more about the book if we're interested. Just a couple of keys to the argument to ground us. One, and what's the role of exit? Because I'm going to in a minute come back to the title, what happens when there is no exit? Well, one function of exit for Hirschman was it serves, and this is why and is important, it serves as a way to amplify the power of loyalty or voice. Just to give you one example that Hirschman does talk about is that the threat of a customer to leave their loyalty to buying a Mercedes-Benz, to buy a BMW. And I'm using the automobile example purposefully because Hirschman, although he was a terrible driver, he loved cars. And he loved BMWs in particular, though he never owned one. But the threat of exiting from your loyalty to Mercedes-Benz to buy a BMW will force the Mercedes-Benz company to hear the price signal, and here is the price system at work. Take the signal and do whatever it takes to keep the customer's loyalty. The second is, and it builds on this point, is that exit in Hirschman's imaginary functioned much more as a market solution. It was the language of social and individual praxis that was deeply sewn into his own training as an economist. And so choosing one brand over another was the way in which, in the marketplace, actors exercise their agency. The assumption is, of course, that there was always a choice, right, in the marketplace. You could go one place or another. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. And of course, the global context of the 1960s is very important for understanding. What he was very captivated by was this juxtaposition in another moment of, in the late 1960s, of perceived decline, particularly as a German who was living in the United States at the time, the decline of the US, especially as the televised, which was really beginning to happen after 1968, the televised imagery of the war in Vietnam was arriving back into living rooms of Americans and was shaking up the consensus, along with the assassinations. And we're dealing with assassinations all over again in the United States. There was a sense of crisis and decline, and what he saw was a push towards greater voice, demonstration, and at the same time, a push towards greater exit, withdrawal from the system. The coinage was checking out, right? Including, in one response to the war in Vietnam, was to leave for Canada and Sweden and Germany and so on with the draft dodgers. So he was trying to analyze what was going on at the time. We need to roll back a little bit more, which is one more step, because this is where the seed is planted for the misreading of Hirschman, which is his own encounter with Friedrich Hayek. When Hirschman is born in Berlin in 1915. In 1933, he's forced to leave. He's a young activist. He's a student of economics at the University of Berlin, a young activist in the Social Democratic Party, forced to leave in April, goes to Paris. I'm not going to go through the whole 800 pages. But at the end of the Second World War, so he serves in the Spanish Civil War, he serves in the French army very briefly in the collapse of France. He winds up in the United States, and he joins the American army. Serves in the U.S. Army, and at the end of the war, he's in Italy. He's in Rome. In the fall of 1945, the war is over. He writes a letter every second day to his wife, Sarah, back in New York. And as he was dying, it was a part of the process of writing the book was rereading the letters that he wrote to Sarah while he was serving in North Africa and in Europe during the Second World War. And that was a very emotional experience as part of the process of writing the book. But he writes a letter to Sarah from Rome. And he says that he describes the ways in which he's walking down the street in Rome, walks into a bookstore, and finds a book that has just been published in the bookstore. There are very, very few books. There's little paper available, but it's The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. He immediately takes the book, reads the book. He's very impressed by it. It has shaped him, and he will read Hayek kind of on and off for the next 10 years. But he writes to Sarah, I've read this book. I've now, and the reason why I detoured on the story about the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, and the French army, is he says to Sarah, and you have to remember, he's still a young man at this stage, I've served in 3 armies. I have fought in 3 different stages of the war against fascism. I hate armies. I hate large organizations. And he explains to her that they crush the individual's soul. And he never wants to serve in a military again. And this idea, and then he's demobilized and returns to the United States. But this idea from Hayek that that large organizations are a problem for the individual is very important for him. This is where it's an unstable mix with his moral compass, which is, as a socialist, and believes in the collective. He's trying to resolve this inside him. So you have to bear that in mind. That's throughout his work. That voice of the individualist is present for Hirschman. And that's what these guys are picking up on, because it's there. So it's a misreading because it decontextualizes, but it's there. So to wind up, the thing about exit, of course, is it presumes that there is no exit. But Alex has just told us there is no exit. There's a poster. There's no exit out there. And of course, Alex is right. There are fundamental ways in which there is no exit. All the colonizing Mars fantasies are just the backdrop to the fact that in the Anthropocene, we live in a form of togetherness. And in fact, Mike and I were just talking about the absence of the nuclear threat, even though we are now approaching a moment of nuclear risk that has probably been the greatest in, I'm just trying to count, maybe 2 generations already. We talked about a book by Annie Jacobson called Nuclear War, which I just checked, and it's a bestseller on the New York Times list, which paints a scenario of the first 72 hours of an imagined launch of 2 missiles aimed from North Korea at the United States, at the Pentagon, and a nuclear reactor in California. There is no escape. If you read that book, there is no escape even from immediacy of time, because each second is the last of that second and unrepeatable. You can't roll the clock back. And the loss of control of time as well as space really does mean, in this sense, that exit means something very different than I think Hirschman had ever imagined. There have been previous cases we could go through where closed systems, and I hope we can talk about systems, have affected our ways of collective thinking. The 1890s, obviously the 1930s, the 1970s. When you don't sense that you have an exit, how does that affect voice and loyalty? Right? Is the question for us to think about. If the Anthropocene is the future, and nuclear annihilation is a reality we're going to have to wake back up to, how does that affect voice and loyalty? Just to put one more Hirschmanian thought out there, Hirschman always thought that there were 2 ways of responding to a sense of a crisis like this. One is solidaristic. You know, his image was you row together. Each person grabs part of the oar and you pull together, and the other is everybody runs for the exit. And we don't yet know which of those 2 urges is going to prevail. So how useful is no exit for progressive causes? Right? Once you don't have the option of exit to amplify voice or redouble loyalty, which is the and part, and we took exit out, what do we think? This, I think, is a question we're going to have to start to think about, and that's why the thinking of these two responses to crises might be helpful. I think the progressives have lost some of the vocabulary that was once very useful for thinking in these terms. Loyalty, I'm looking forward to hearing from Maike, is a language that's been very instrumentalized by the right. Loyalty to the nation above all. This has always been a problem for progressives, right? It was not that natural a concept. The nation, progressives tended to think in international solidaristic ways of imagining alliances and allegiances. The flag is people treat with some ambiguity. And there's now been a funny kind of role reversal. And here I'm telescoping, even though I live in the UK, though even in the UK we're now experiencing it, a role reversal back to declarations of loyalty to law, to the Constitution, to the nation. You can watch progressives in the UK and the United States wrestle with this problem of how to take back some of that vocabulary. I'll just end on one final note, which is, what does it mean to live in a world where there is no exit, and closure of systems has, I'm afraid, tended then to favor, but discursively, right-wing formulas about social action, right? Or rather, maybe we can pose that as a question, that thus far, thinking without exit has favored that way of arguing about how we should deal with social problems, and progressives have had a problem. Or rather, let's compose that as a hypothesis. I tend to think so, at least watching the landscape now. Well, maybe throw that open as a question for all of us to talk about. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I see you both eager to answer. Maike?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, so much. It triggered actually my thinking, because I have to say, maybe democracy stands for that there always is an exit option, that there is choice, that there's not only one way. And I just want to throw in one thought of Hannah Arendt, who says we have to learn that freedom needs boundaries. And I think it's an exaggeration of these exiteers, that they say that there is no exit and we have to go to Mars. And what they actually mean is they want to exit, they opt out of the world and exit responsibility for a common world. And I think what Hirschman and also Arendt stand for is getting ahead collectively, that we don't opt out and don't have like a exit party, and still stay inside, but learn how to deal. And that is a challenge, actually, to deal with the Anthropocene, to the feeling that we have no choice, that we have to react to the destruction of biodiversity, or climate change, and so on. But I think for progressives to think about it, that there are many ways to deal with these kind of boundaries and questions, and not only one way. And in a democratic way, we can tackle these questions and also solve them. And we have to regain confidence that we are actually able to solve these kind of things. Because these kind of narratives are quite dangerous, to say that there is no exit, that we live in like a totalitarian planetary situation. I don't believe that this is the case. And to claim loyalty to the institutions we have, to democracy, to the division of powers, Rechtsstaatlichkeit, so that we have quite strong instruments to deal with all these kinds of things, that there is responsibility, and we should lose that. These people, they want to destroy the world, and I think we should like act and fight for the world. But this also means that there are many ways and not only two sides, like the people that opt for destruction and the others. No, there is still plurality, and we have to fight for the right solutions. And don't let go of the discourse about it. So that was just the idea that came to my head when you were talking, and I just had to say that. In that way, and now spoke English. Okay, just
and
happened.
you don't even have to translate. That's great. You can also speak in German, but what would be your perspective on this no exit? Is there no exit? Is there an exit? You're an expert in system theories. We talked about closed systems. So, and you're also very knowledgeable about the philosophy of Hayek. So maybe you can give us another perspective on this.
There are so many points to link to. First of all, there's now the pressure to talk English.
No.
I try as well. I try as well. Won't be very funny. First of all, just a short remark about this wonderful story, Hirschman being in Rome and finding Hayek's Road to Serfdom. What's so interesting about that, there is a similarity between those years, 50, 45, and 46 on one side, and 89, 90 on the other side, because those were two moments when the libertarians thought we won a battle against fascism or against communism, and we are at once starting to have to go into the next battle. Because there's one thing we always have to battle, which is the Leviathan, which is the state, which is an immense attempt of the state, of political systems, so to speak, to regulate human beings and societal life. And just when everybody thinks, well, we won, they know, and they are at the Society Mont Pelerin, for instance, they said in '89 already, well, we have to be aware of the next enemy we have to fight. Yeah? So the one thing which Nick Land and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all those right libertarian guys are about is always, can we have a chance to go for a society where everybody is free, politically and economically free, which means where there is no hindrance, no blockage, no restrictions on any kind of a state. Yeah, that's what they are up to, and that's the right side of their thinking. Because being free means we have to forego any possibility to regulate something like welfare for everybody. We have to forego any possibility to have something like a community, a mechanism to decide whatever is important for communities. Yeah, this is a libertarian and a radically anarchist libertarian side to them, and there's this running through thread, from the 40s, and even you can go back to anarchist thinking in the 19th century and find the same issues. Yeah, always the same libertarian versus socialist, etatist, whatever you think. Now, second point, a sociologist looking to that, and a sociologist reading Hirschman, is first of all, of course, very, very fond of your aunt, that's indeed, I think also, that's indeed the pointe of the book, which he, by the way, did very nicely work out in his application of his ideas to the German Wende, to the year '89 in Germany, where he did a whole essay in the Leviathan. Leviathan, a left-wing journal, interesting enough, yes. Where he said, well, the interesting thing about Dresden and Berlin and the Hungarian border is that loyalty, voice, and exit came together. Yeah. First of all, people started to exit, and nobody noticed because to exit is an individual thing. They're just disappearing. But they met at the station in Dresden, and they met at the Hungarian boundary, and they thought that there are others trying to exit as well. Yeah? So what could we do from being in a community, in a bunch of people trying to exit? What could we do together? Then they started to think about loyalty for whatever, capitalism, socialism, the D-Mark, whatever, and they thought about voice. Yeah? Isn't there a way to organize another kind of a change in the GDR than just exiting. Yeah? So this is the end he's thinking about. Second point and last point for the moment. A sociologist reading Hirschman is reading an economist. He is an economist who is highly informed by institutional and historical knowledge, which is rare among economists, which is rare. And we of course, we love that, and we read that. In Klaus Offer, for instance, or Niklas Luhmann, there's lots of Hirschmanian thinking, and we are at once starting to apply those, let's say, mechanism like exit voice loyalty to different kinds of systems. So first of all, what you highlighted as well, it's interesting not just to think about exit voice and loyalty from the individual side, meaning what choice do I have when buying a Mercedes-Benz, or when living in the GDR, or when trying to get rich to have a chance to get to Mars as well. Yeah, that's one side. The other side is for organizations to try to think about how they organize the three possibilities of exit, voice, and loyalty. Threatened by the exit, of course. Sometimes even allowing people to exit. Yeah, there's lots of complimenting out of people in certain organizations as well. But the interesting thing, of course, is how do we organize loyalty, how do we organize voice, and what kind of loyalty and what kind of voice? And when you look at this question, and then you, as a sociologist would do, you look at the different systems we have in society, like family, organizations, politics, economics, science, religion. You are always looking at systems which have different ways to have their balance between these three possibilities. Yeah, just one example, the religion. Yeah? You can't exit from religion without stopping to believe. But you can switch from one church to another. Yeah? You can become heretical, yeah? For your belief. Before you exit your belief, you change your belief. And you, of course, you say that this is a true belief which you are insisting on. Or in science, another example. Yeah, what possibilities to exit voice and being loyal heavy in science? We can switch theories, we can switch methods, we can switch, of course, disciplines. Yeah? So the interesting thing for me is that having a certain branch of options on a very operational level, one theory versus another theory, one church versus another church, can mean that you have a voice on this operational level and be constantly loyal on the meta level. Yeah? You opt still for science. You opt still for religion. Or, as you said, you're still opting for politics, depending on the political party you are choosing. Yeah? So it's a multi-level question in the last instance. And that would a sociologist comment upon when reading Hirschman. Hirschman, as an economist, and I love to read him, of course, looks always at a certain, let's say, binary or dual distinction between a unspecified society on the one side, perhaps some markets, which is the third part, and the state market, let's say a ternary distinction, state market and society. Yeah, whereas we as sociologists don't start to specify what's going on there in society. Yeah, and enjoy to have the mechanism discovered by economists, watching operating in all those different systems. Yeah. Last comment, because you asked for that, the most recent version of system theory is only about closed systems. so maybe we get in real trouble there. But what the idea by Maturana, Heinz von Förster, Niklas Luhmann, and others about talking about closed systems. Why are they talking closed systems? Because first they want to say closed system means system consists only of a certain operation which has always to be the same operation. A family is, whatever it is doing, it's always saying, we are the family, it's our family, we are the family. An economy is nothing else but organizing chains of payments. A political system is always doing political decisions and nothing else. So that's the closed thing about it. Yeah? Then they are open in terms of matter, open in terms of energy, but closed in terms of information. Why is that interesting for us? Because first of all, we say, how blind may those closed systems be? Yeah, my example always has been organizations or the economy, highly subtle, sophisticated systems, yeah, like the economy, yeah, organizing for banks and enterprises and markets and clients and so on. A highly complicated system, highly sophisticated in dealing with its problems and not seeing any problem they are causing by solving their problems. This combination of sophistication and blindness is only to be highlighted when you speak about closed systems. And the other thing is, when you speak about closed systems, and you say at the same time that those closed systems are, of course, working in their environments, the question is, how do they, what kind of environment do they recognize? How do they organize openness being closed? Yeah, and there the interesting thing starts, because you and that's what Luhmann, I think, very strongly emphasized. You start to think about systems having to endanger themselves in order to be able to reproduce themselves. Yeah? Because we are closed, a system says to itself, yeah? We have to look at the environment and ask ourselves constantly, what do we see and what don't we see? Of course, there are many options, yeah, systems then developing ideologies in order to blind out what they might see when looking at the environment. There is a certain kind of panic those closely open systems go into when they start to realize, well, maybe those things won't go so well so long, and so on. So there are very many mechanisms to close on that closure. Yeah? But those are the very moments when those systems become pathological. And we as sociologists and historians and economists can say that and can look at, let's say, mixed versions of openness and closure by looking at systems.
Thank you very much. Ich switche jetzt einfach mal aufs Deutsch. Vielleicht traut ihr euch dann auch, dann wieder Deutsch zu sprechen. Will nur einen kleinen Werbeblock einfügen, weil du das erwähnst, den Essay von Hirschman in, just talking now about the second essay. Das ist in dem Buch, das Schöne an diesem Buch ist, dass beide Essays hier drin sind. Ne? Also Hirschmanns Exit, Voice and Loyalty ist sozusagen sein 68er Buch, und er hat dann 89, 90 seine eigene Theorie überdacht, weil er dachte, okay, das funktioniert nicht, das kommt nicht ganz hin mit dem Mauerfall. Was eine interessante Entwicklung auch ist, wie er sich selber sozusagen in Frage stellt und seine eigene Theorie weiterentwickelt. Aber jetzt diese, switch back to English. Maike, you want to respond to, I saw you because the question of the no exit and the closed systems. Let me just say that the last sentence of this book you mentioned is, there is no exit. No, this is the last sentence of this book. So, and it's always about the situation, of course, that we have no planet B, as we like to say. You know, that we are locked on the Earth system. So I stop here. Maybe I'm curious for your answer, but...
Aber eigentlich, ich versuche es jetzt mal auf Deutsch, wollte ich nochmal auf die Geschichte des Endes der DDR zurückgehen, weil ich glaube, da sind noch ein paar interessante Punkte zu holen, weil Hirschman erzählt das in meinen Augen als Tragödie, weil er sagt, ne, ja, ich habe mich vielleicht vorher sozusagen, ich habe immer gedacht, dass Exit Voice schwächt. Also wo die Leute die Exit-Option haben, wird sozusagen der Widerspruch schwächer, die Position geschwächt. Wenn man sich vor Augen führt, dass Leute ja diese Option wählen, er geht davon aus, um eine Situation zu verbessern, die sie als schlecht empfinden. Man kann rausgehen, Exit, oder eben die Stimme erheben, Voice, dass das sozusagen gegenseitig mit einem Minus versehen ist. So in der Regel. Und so beschreibt er das ja auch in dem ersten Aufsatz. Und er sagt, am Ende der DDR sehen wir, dass sich Exit und Voice gegenseitig bestärken, dass das auch passieren kann. Dass nämlich Exit, wie du beschrieben hast, plötzlich eine kollektive Aktion wird. Aber die Tragödie, die Hirschman beschreibt, ist nämlich die, dass das die Loyalität aushebelt. Nämlich die Loyalität zum Staat. ihn zu verbessern und anzutreten, sozusagen eine demokratischere, eine bessere DDR zu begründen. Und ich glaube, man kann diesem Aufsatz, das ist zumindest meine Interpretation, ansehen, dass er es als vertane Chance ansieht, dass hier sozusagen the power of voice durch dieses Überhandnehmen des Exits dazu führt, dass hier sozusagen eine Entwicklungsperspektive abgeschnitten wird. Und er macht das sehr schön fest an den Slogans, dass dieses "Wir sind das Volk", "We are the people", dazu sagt, wir sind ein Volk. Und damit gewissermaßen diese Entwicklungsmöglichkeit abgeschnitten wird. Und er sieht sozusagen, und das ist natürlich etwas, wenn wir jetzt, und das können wir vielleicht anwenden auf diese sozusagen etwas totalitäre, planetare Situation, die wir jetzt haben. Was passiert gewissermaßen, wenn jetzt die Exit aus der Demokratie sich mit sozusagen Voice verbindet und die Bindung der Loyalität uns abhanden kommt? Ne? So, wenn dieses Programm, was wir hier besprechen, quasi sich durchsetzt, oder das ist die Gefahr, die ich dort sehe. Weil ich glaube, dass Hirschman genau dieses Zusammenspiel, deswegen danke für das "und", weil das ganz wichtig ist, dass sozusagen zwei dieser Optionen die andere auch aushebeln können und dass dieses Ende der DDR-Geschichte das ganz gut illustriert, dass eben dieses Getting Ahead Collectively dadurch auch beendet werden kann. Und das ist vielleicht genau das, was diese sozusagen Exiteers gerade wollen, eben Entwicklungsperspektiven abschneiden, wie wir eben auf diesem Planeten demokratisch vorankommen können.
Ja, die Reihenfolge war, wenn ich das richtig erinnere, der Sprüche 89, wir wollen raus, wir bleiben hier, wir sind das Volk, wir sind ein Volk. Ja, so. Ja, in der Tat. Und dann natürlich, ich bin Volker, ne, auf dem Alexanderplatz 1990 von Heiner Müller dann begeistert aufgegriffen. Nur eins noch, ich meine, das ist genau das, was Hirschman, finde ich, dann doch ein bisschen, unsoziologisch, klingt jetzt ein bisschen dumm, ein bisschen zu politisch macht. Dass er sozusagen eine zu große, seine Kategorien sind zu kompakt. Ja, also was sich 89 abspielte, war ja, dass beispielsweise in den ostdeutschen Universitäten, in Berlin, in Leipzig, in Halle, in Rostock, in Greifswald, was weiß ich wo, sich genau diese Art von Loyalität entwickelte zu einem alten, uneingelösten Sozialismus auf der einen Seite und eine Möglichkeit, diesen oder bestimmte Ideen der Organisationsreform, nicht der politischen Reform, in den Kapitalismus rüber zu transformieren, die dann irgendwann weggewischt wurde von den herrschenden Tendenzen. Aber was wir ja heute tun und was wir heute tun, um diese sozusagen ausweglose Exit-Option zu diskutieren, nach der du fragst, ist, dass wir sagen, müssen wir nicht tatsächlich viel differenzierter schauen? Müssen wir nicht gucken, dass diese Universitätsleute rechtzeitig rausgeholt werden aus ihren Debatten und dass wir denen anders zuhören, oder dem runden Tisch damals, dass wir denen anders zuhören, als man ihnen in Kohls Zeiten, ich hätte jetzt was gesagt, in diesen kohligen Zeiten getan haben. Ja? Also brauchen wir nicht, wenn wir jetzt diese planetarische Frage der Exit-Option diskutieren, brauchen wir dann nicht einen scharfen Blick eben nicht für die eine Frage raus oder drin bleiben oder Untergang oder Rettung, sondern müssen wir nicht fragen, was macht welche Art von Wirtschaft? Was machen welche Organisationen? Wo sind die Finanzmärkte gegenwärtig aufgestellt? Welche politischen Parteien sind mit welchen Optionen unterwegs? Welche Art von lokalen und regionalen Entscheidungsprozessen gibt es denn, in denen irgendetwas zum Besseren sich wenden kann, in denen überhaupt irgendwas zur Entscheidung gestellt wird? Ne? So. Und da wird es, glaube ich, für uns interessant. Und dann kann man immer wieder neu sehen, dass also von dem sozusagen simpelsten Versammlung eines Bürgerrates oder einer Diskussion, wie wir sie hier haben, ja, bis zur Frage, wie sind welche Parteien aufgestellt, immer wieder Exit Voice Loyalty die entscheidende Kombination ist. Im Moment haben wir ganz eindeutig hier eine No-Exit-Option, ja, weil die Veranstaltung ist noch nicht zu Ende. Ja, wir haben die Chance der Voice, wir sind extrem loyal einander gegenüber, bis jetzt zumindest, und das Publikum ist noch loyaler. Ne? Aber man merkt ja, wie sozusagen, wenn wir jetzt ewig reden würden, ja, wie die Loyalität allmählich schwindet, wie die Exit-Option stärker wird, Ja, wie die einen oder anderen auch sagen würden, also jetzt wäre es mal interessant, eine Frage aus dem Publikum zu stellen. Ja, sozusagen diese Variabilität des Mischungsverhältnisses von diesen drei, und es sind nur drei, es gibt keinen vierten, ja, diesen drei Mechanismen, das ist ja das Faszinierende. Und meine Frage ist, wie können wir die in all den Stellen, von der Tesla-Fabrik in Brandenburg angefangen bis zu politischen Entscheidungsprozessen in Sachsen und was weiß ich wohin, wie können wir diese Optionalität zwischen diesen drei Mechanismen stärken? Ja.
Well, there's so many ideas have come up. I just actually a joke that Albert used to like to tell regarding too much voice. And the problem of too much voice is Oscar Wilde was asked why he was not a socialist, and he would answer, because it takes too many evenings. You know, that socialists just like to talk so much, and he had better things to do. But there was the flip side, too. This goes to Micah's point about the possibility that exit might weaken voice. You know, the and is a very complicated conjunction because it produces also a tension between them. I was looking in this edition of the book, and I think it's in here, but I don't have enough time to fish around in it. But in the mid-'70s, when he was being discovered in German, and it was largely the work of Klaus Affe, who was starting to apply some of the concepts in his own sociology and is thinking about the welfare state in Western Europe. Yeah, okay. So he sends a draft of what will become the German translation of the book to Klaus for his thoughts. And he tells the story in that, and I don't think it's in here though, well, double check and see. He tells the story of, or he has a counterfactual in his mind, and he says, we, the young Jews of Germany, had we stayed in the spring of 1933, our relatives would not have died. Had we stayed and continued to exercise voice and loyalty instead of leaving, in his case, he left for France, that's why I told you the story, he wonders whether they had inadvertently weakened the opposition to Hitler at a critical moment in German history. Affe writes, this is a little self-dramatizing. I don't think you're responsible for the Holocaust, don't worry. But there is a question that burned in his mind about whether too much voice could produce exit, the Oscar Wilde problem, or too much exit could weaken voice, that they're not necessarily mutually reinforcing, which goes to, I think, a very important point that you're making, which is that these are very lumpy categories. And you're right, he did have this triangle of state, society, market, exit, voice, and loyalty, political science, economics, sociology. He was trying to create these big containers to explain how the operations worked. And the closer you get to them, and that's why he kept rewriting changes to his theory, rethinking it. It was the triad that required the most re-elaboration, was because it wasn't very settled. He wrote it in a hurry, and it required a lot more refinement. I mean, a few other quick thoughts, and then over to you, Alex. I mean, I think you've made a very important point about exiteers as destroyers. But I think this point about no, there is no exit, is that the rich who fantasize about Elysium or an island while nuclear missiles are going back and forth. It's crazy to think these guys are really going to. He keeps asking them, "What do you want to survive? what's going to be left on the planet? They don't really have answers to these questions. But he makes the point in that book that they are destroying the world that is creating the conditions that motivate and justify their exit, right? Their preferred outcome is exit. They want to get away from society. They want to get away from the world, so they go about destroying it. And that was a very perverse part, just to come to the present and the future, a perverse part of Doge. When Elon Musk moved into the White House, was to destroy the federal government in order to drive people to the need to exit, to find other solutions to collective and shared problems. And one example of this, for any of you who are following the assault on American universities, that one of the agendas behind smashing the American universities was to undermine the central role that American universities had played in developing the research infrastructure that enables all the technologies to exist. And it's not just American universities, it's German universities, it's British universities. But by going after them around diversity and equality, and that as part of the Doge enterprise, was to drive the research funding out of the universities and into the corporations. To say, why should the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, which under Kennedy is doing the very same thing, is to redirect billions of dollars every single year into SpaceX, into Amazon, and so on. They will internalize the research agenda because they're the great disruptors. Universities are just too slow. Theaters are too slow. The artists are too slow. We command time. We don't slow down. We smash, we destroy everything. So there is an agenda behind the exit, and even epistemology behind how knowledge is produced. That's behind the exit, the drive to produce the conditions that force the exit to happen. Interestingly enough, of course, they had to take control of the very thing that they despise the most, which is the state, in order to create those conditions, and thereby elevating the risks that require them to buy islands in the Pacific. Just maybe two more points. Can in the title of the subtitle of the book? Actually, you don't have the subtitle on the cover. No, it's inside. Please read the subtitle of the book. It's very important. Sorry to obsess about this, but it comes to this question of decline.
Abwanderung und Widerspruch, Reaktionen auf Leistungsabfall bei Unternehmungen, Organisationen und Staaten.
And the issue is decline, right? How organizations, societies, people respond to the problem of decline, which is what you read. And this is the dilemma of closed systems versus open systems, is that he really wants to believe in the need for an open system in it to trigger the signals for the actors to respond to decline, because he believes in, or he wants to believe in, the capability of renewal, reinvention, reconstruction without destruction, or the costs of destruction, which is something we should be thinking about, because that's what these tech bros are trying to do, destroy in order to build the new. And Hirschman's very concerned about that operation. And so we might want to think about openness and closedness of systems and what those conditions that trigger the powers of that triad of exit, voice, and loyalty. They're very different. Last point. The reason why no exit, just to come back to this, the title of, is because I don't think Albert quite had in mind yet something that I think we are thinking about up here, and it's worth wondering what that's the limit of his way of thinking, which is the nature of interdependence. The exit option presumes that the costs of leaving is neutral and potentially positive. But in an interdependent system, that's not the case. Interdependence, by its definition, means that there is a cost when one part secedes. I live in a country now that is paying a very high price year after year for the decision to leave the European Union. Breaking up systems have enormous costs. Staying loyal to systems that are increasingly in decline and don't deliver what we expect of them also have costs, right? This is the dilemma. But I think Albert didn't have interdependence in his eye. And when we think about the Anthropocene, the nuclear threat, and so on, I think we have to think in terms of interdependence. And what does that do then to exit voice and loyalty? Question mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very good point to discuss beyond exit voice and loyalty, which I think is something that Hirschman would have liked. You know, it's always the renewal, the idea of renewal, also of self-subversion was a word that he created for his own. You know, that he subverted his own ideas all the time. That's why he didn't write his own biography, right? He didn't write an autobiography. He said because he likes to subvert his own idea to keep writing. So he found you to write his biography. But what I wanted to add, which I think is from the book of Douglas Rushkoff, is that it's so much in the thinking of the tech bros in their model of how they make business. Because they believe in this exceptional, you know, that's a very high, the growth of a network effect, very, very quickly you grow, very fast.
Control time.
Yeah, but then you have to find the right moment in time to exit and sell it. And then all the costs that you mentioned, you would give to the public. And that's part.
You hoard all the gains and externalize all the losses.
That's the business model. So it's a business model going cosmic in a way, to thinking of, you know, and they also think they can also going meta is also part of their language. So what Mark Zuckerberg did and calling Facebook Meta now, they call it going meta because they think they will the platform of the platform, and then they will control everything. So all the time this idea of we could control everything, because this is the experience they made in those 30 years now, and seeing how the information economy is developing. They think they believe this is how economy functions in a large, and they also think this is how they could run a state. And yes, and also just adding, because you mentioned Doge, this blogger Menecius Mouldboug, I always call himself as a blogger, Curtis Yarvin, he invented the idea of Doge. If you want to Google him, Curtis Yarvin, you might find a video. He didn't call it Doge. We all know it's Department of Government Efficiency. He used to call it RAGE. And that was also an acronym for Retire All Government Employees. And he is the son of a government employee. And he gave talks about it, and he said, well, but I know, because I'm the son of a government employee, and we should really crack up the state and crack up the Leviathan and go back to Hobbes. And that's why they are literally reactionaries. They are really literal reactionaries, going back to Nick Land is reading Hobbes and think this is where it's going. Sorry, but now, Maike, you already had the impulse to talk.
Yeah, I just had two questions. So are they actually that great? Because I think they have a problem, because these inventions, they don't come. These great products, where are they? So they don't have the solutions. So with Elon Musk, it looked that way, to go e-mobility, but actually it does not happen, and I think it's some kind of craziness going on there, because they don't have these kinds of products. It's not the new iPhone and all these products who create solutions for our problems. So they grab power and grab what there's. So it's just a myth. And the second questions I have: do we have to think like them? In terms of there is no exit, we live like in a closed system. So maybe these stories or these frameworks are not true. Maybe this is not the case. Maybe we just have to think about the planetary situation as something that has always been there. Nature has always been a kind of boundary for human beings. And I like to quote Hannah Arendt there. She says, we are we are limited beings. We live on planet Earth, it is our home, and it's okay. So, and to go to space and have these kind of fantasies, that makes us quite small as human beings. And we should be proud to be these, diese diversen Menschen auf diesem Planeten, and have to dwell on this and learn that freedom is not this limitless liberty, but something that happens when people start acting together and actually create solutions for actual problems. And I think these guys, they create their own fantasies and they dwell on it, and they get rich and richer. And so they have many people that follow them. That's a problem. And I think we should come up with, kind of stance, Haltung against that, to have progressive ideas and show that we can do it otherwise. And not only sit here and think, oh, it's very bad, oh, those bad guys. So, but think about how we can come up with other versions and other stories, what the world is and what these kinds of frameworks are. So I think it's kind of dangerous to believe that in climate change that there is no exit and we have to act in a certain way. Of course, we have to fight climate change and protect our environment, of course, but we have several and thousands, a million ways to do that, so on this planet. And we just have to start thinking about it better and not like, I think it's a kind of trap, this kind of thinking.
That's a very good point. Ich rede jetzt auch mal kurz wieder Deutsch. Because Hannah Arendt in Vita Activa wollte es eigentlich Human Condition nennen. Und ihre Reaktion war auf den Sputnik-Schock. Und dass sie dachte, jetzt glauben Leute, sie glauben wirklich, und deswegen fand ich in deinen Büchern, Maike hat 2 Bücher über Hannah Arendt geschrieben, diese Aktualisierung zur Klimakrise von Hannah Arendt so interessant. Sie auch meinte, eigentlich sind wir in so einem ähnlichen Punkt wie damals 1957, als sie das Buch schreibt. Und der Sputnik-Schock war, dass die Leute wirklich glaubten, sie könnten einen archimedischen Punkt finden da draußen im Universum und könnten alles aushebeln und vergessen diese Begrenztheit, die Human Condition. Und das, finde ich, ist auch das ist eigentlich genau die Situation von Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, die diese Marspläne propagieren und das als größten Ausdruck ihrer Macht sehen, dass sie eben, ich meine, Jeff Bezos war der erste Privatmensch im All. Damit hat er Geschichte geschrieben, ne? Und hat auf die Erde zurückgewunken und als wäre das so eine Art Superhuman, das er dadurch erreicht hat. Und das ist eigentlich der Punkt. Bruno Latour nennt sie Erdflüchter. Ne? Es ist eine Aufkündigung der Solidarität mit allen menschlichen und nichtmenschlichen Lebewesen und die Fantasie, man könnte so eine Autarkie haben und einfach da draußen leben. Es ist wirklich einfach die Aufkündigung der Solidarität. And now I switch back in English. I mentioned also Bruno Latour. I think that's an Earth flighting, the flight from Earth is this superhuman fantasy of the tech bros and the denial of the human condition. So, but this is the maybe important lesson to learn, what you mentioned, that the limitation as a precondition for liberty, a new way of thinking. Limitation doesn't limit, but it's a precondition for liberty. Maybe that's also a lesson to learn for the climate activism. Of course, it is dangerous I want you to panic. I was thinking, no, I don't want you out there to panic. Panicking is never a good reaction. So that would be my question to you, Dirk, because you were on the point also of the closing of the system and how to develop the alternatives, how to see different options besides the one exit options. I mean, aren't we in the same situation? You mentioned the slogan, "Wir bleiben hier." Isn't that our answer to Jeff Bezos up there said, we stay here because we know we can only live here?
Also ich kann das nur auf Deutsch beantworten. Ich glaube, was wir bei der Art und Weise, wie wir jetzt hier diskutieren, nicht ganz übersehen dürfen, ist, dass Leute wie Peter Thiel oder Elon Musk, die uns zuhören würden, ein mitleidiges Lächeln um die Lippen spielen lassen würden, weil wir immer noch an diesen christlichen Mythos glauben, dass es darauf ankommt, dass Menschen sich zusammentun, um anders als ausbeutend auf dieser Erde zu überleben. Ich glaube, was die Kraft des Denkens, kann man das kaum nennen, was die Kraft dieses Impulses, dieses Impetus ausmacht bei diesen rechtslibertären Denkern, ist ist das, was man vielleicht am besten den nietzscheanischen Impuls nennen kann. Die nietzscheanische Einsicht. Nietzsche war einer der großartigsten, intelligentesten Philosophen des 19. Jahrhunderts, die wir weltweit hatten. Er war der Einzige, der in der Lage war, die Ergebnisse der neurophysiologischen Forschung über geschlossene Systeme ernst zu nehmen und diese ganze Genealogie der Moral, diese ganze Art und Weise, wie sich die Menschheit organisiert hat in so einer Art sklavenhaltenden Gemeinschaftsideologie des im Grunde genommen Verbergens von Problemen hinter den Kirchenräumen, in die man sich flüchtet. Entschuldigung, ich stottere. Nietzsche war derjenige, der die Genealogie der Moral als eine beschrieben hat, in der sich der Mensch selbst fesselt. Das ist, glaube ich, die richtige Formulierung. Und Leute wie Musk und andere wollen diese Fesseln sprengen und glauben, wie Nietzsche mit seinem Übermenschen, mit seinem tanzenden Zarathustra, dass das möglich wäre, diese Fesseln zu sprengen. Ja? Und deswegen gucken die auf uns, die wir uns bemühen, Entscheidungsprozesse neu zu definieren, demokratische Prozesse zu starten, irgendwie uns darauf zu verständigen, was noch möglich ist, gucken die mit einem müden Lächeln. Ja? Und sagen, die werden alle ertränkt von der nächsten Flutwelle. Dann hat sich das. Und wir werden in Singapur oder was weiß ich wo, auf irgendwelchen extraterrestrischen Entitäten, werden wir Nietzsche lesen wahrscheinlich. Ja? Ich glaube, man muss das, es fällt mir schwer, das so zu formulieren, aber ich glaube, man muss dieses Lächeln, das die über uns haben, man muss das scharf formulieren, weil wir dem gewachsen sein müssen. Ja? Wir müssen irgendeine Narration entwickeln, und wir haben sie nicht, glaube ich, die in der Lage ist, diesem Übermut, ja, dieser Lust zu tanzen, die sind nicht umsonst reich geworden. Ja? Also Elon Musk ist wirklich ein genialer Unternehmer. Ja? Auch Trump ist auf seine Art und Weise, man möchte es gar nicht aussprechen, ein genialer Unternehmer. Egal, ob der jetzt Kryptowährungen in die Welt setzt oder seine Enkelin mit Pullovern handeln lässt, das ist alles sofort Millionen und Milliarden wert, was die Leute treiben. Ja? Die lächeln, die lachen über uns. Lächeln ist gar nicht das richtige Wort. So, welche Narration setzen wir gegen diese Art des Übermuts? Ja, das wäre meine Frage.
Well, I mean, that's why I ended concerned whether I think your point on the narrative is extremely important. That progressives are not in control of the narrative machine right now, and I think a lot of it pivots around some of these key words. The one that we've been talking about is freedom, and I think the dilemma for you, Micah, and for all of us is it gets, the social is framed as that which constrains the individual. And these guys, if they were sitting out there listening to you, they'd just be laughing, unfortunately. Because I think they just think the social is that which exists in order to constrain the superhero. It has run its course in their narrative. It had its purpose. It did wonder. They, in a very patronizing voice, oh, it did good things along the way. Yes, fine, but we're in a new world historic moment now. It's a world of a redefined idea of what intelligence is. It's a movement. It's a moment of redefined ideas of value. I mean, they just go through the list and say the old rules just don't apply to us, but we are being constrained by all those old institutions. And so they would just say we have to liberate everybody. And what is so disturbing about the discourse is, and this is what hegemony really means, is that they have allowed this narrative to be one that is very widely shared. I mean, I think lots of people have now come to think of their experience of their engagement with institutions and government and so on as something that taxes them, that takes from them, that regulates them. And people's experience including in the use of the words that they use. And this is why, I don't know about here in Germany, but watching the debate in the United States, kind of being there for a certain amount of it, around the vocabulary of what became called wokeism, was so powerful, because it represented the social as concerned with equality, dignity, and so on, and mocked it. I mean, just made fun of it. That's why they would laugh. They look with disdain at all of that. And instead they have taken the language of freedom rather than diversity. And they say, this is the one that really matters. And look at our machines. Look at the fact that we are colonizing space. They may not be colonizing Mars, but I can't remember the latest figures on how many satellites circulating the planet now that the West, Europe included, have relied on Elon Musk to be throwing into orbit. But it's a very disturbing proportion. We've let it happen. So then they're now telling us we are creating the world that you want. You want your phones to function. You want Ukraine to be able to intercept Russian drones. You need my technologies. And my technologies wouldn't exist if I were not free. Of course, it's utter bullshit. And this is a point I think Michael would say, is that his company was subsidized by the federal government. The reason why he moved his testing sites and launch sites to Texas was because the environmental regulations that were controlling his launch sites, he was getting increasingly furious about. He wanted to accelerate the pace with which he was launching his satellites. So it's to turn a blind eye to the costs of the model and to only extol the benefits. But what that puts the progressives into the position of having to do is just to talk about the costs, right? How compelling a narrative does that add up to?
Well, the point is that I'm quite not interested in the erection of those exiteers and destructivists. If they laugh or not, I'm interested in what my friends say. And this is a quote from Hannah Arendt. Und vielleicht switche ich doch zum Deutschen nochmal.
But if we live in a democracy,
Ja.
don't we, and we play by these rules, and that means wanting to sway the electorate who will influence the choice of our representatives, who will make the rules that govern us, doesn't that matter?
Of course. But
So,
whom do you want to überzeugen quasi? You want to start with the people that's hardest to come by, or you want to start with the people that believe still in some kind of ideas like humanity? I don't want to laugh about humanity and the stance. I think there's a slippery slope. Hannah Arendt said, den Intellektuellen fiel etwas zu Hitler ein. Ganz große, über den Dingen schwebende Dinge. Und ich glaube, hier ist eine Gefahr, dass wir zu sehr an diese Macht und die Power der starken Männer glauben und uns darauf einlassen. Einfach von der Haltung her. Deswegen würde ich sagen, es ist wichtig zu sagen, sich nicht dort beeindrucken zu lassen, dass möglicherweise diese Personen über uns lachen, wenn wir darauf beharren, dass the power of the people stärker ist, als sozusagen die Gewaltfantasien einzelner reicher Menschen. Auch wenn das natürlich eine Herausforderung ist, ich stimme der Analyse ja total zu, dass wir in keinem guten Zustand sind und progressive Ideen brauchen. Aber nur darauf zu starren, sozusagen, wie man auf die Schlange starrt oder das Reh ins Licht, wird uns nicht helfen. Und ich glaube, dass wir eher daran arbeiten sollten, zu schauen, wie können wir über die Welt so sprechen, dass wir unsere Handlungsoptionen vermehren und daran glauben, dass das nicht der Weg für die Zukunft ist, die dort für uns bereitet ist. Und das ist so ein bisschen der Glaube, es ist ein bisschen wie bei Hirschman, der fragt, hätten wir bleiben und was ändern können, aber an dem Punkt sind wir ja noch nicht. Und ich glaube, diesen Funken der Hoffnung des Zusammenhandelns zu retten und dann vielleicht noch zu Nietzsche und Arendt. Ich hatte den Punkt ja gebracht, dass sie sagt, gerade der Blick ins Weltall, der archimedische Punkt, von dort aus auf den Planeten zu gucken, macht die Menschen zu kleinen Ameisen, macht sie schwächer. Und sie hat da sozusagen einen nietzscheanischen Gedanken, dass sie sagt, gerade im Zusammenhandeln entsteht die Größe und nicht indem wir Gewalt- und Größenfantasien sozusagen dieser Natur ausleben und zum Mars fliegen, würde sie wahrscheinlich heute auch sagen, sondern dass die Größe des Menschen in den Geschichten des Zusammenhandelns entsteht und dass Macht auch entsteht, wenn Menschen losgehen und zusammen handeln. Und das ist ein ganz starker Punkt gegen diese Gewaltfantasien des Strong Man. Das sind natürlich Verführungskünste, Demagogie, sind ganz alte, aus dem ganz alten Besteckkasten der Politik. Aber wir müssen aufpassen, dass wir uns nicht zu sehr auf diese Art von Verführung und Argumentation einlassen, auch wenn wir sagen, wir sind ja dagegen, aber sie haben trotzdem einen Punkt der Stärke. Ich glaube das ehrlich gesagt noch nicht. Und ich glaube, es ist wichtig, dagegen auch anzutreten und zu sagen, wo finden wir unsere andere Stärke, nämlich eben eine demokratische Stärke oder eine Stärke, ich würde vielleicht eher allgemein sagen, des Zusammenhandelns. Wo finden wir eine Stärke in unseren Institutionen? Wie können wir dafür sorgen, dass sich diese Ideen und Gedanken eben nicht durchsetzen? Wie können wir dafür werben, dass wir hier wirklich für eine gute Gesellschaft stehen und auch Lösungen finden für diese Probleme? Und auch klar machen, dass es Fantasien sind, dieser Tech-Bros, weil sie die Lösung nicht auf den Tisch legen.
I align with you, ally with you completely. I think one of the sad effects on our public discourse, who knows what we're really talking about here, but is the degree to which some collective terms that refer to collective imaginaries like humanity, have been so debased, right? They just don't have the purchase. In watching the ways in which cruelty has become increasingly normalized all over the place, really normalized. I mean, just to give you a small anecdote, I don't know if any of you are following in the wake of the assassination of this young man called Charlie Kirk in the United States, the ways in which he was literally, the word martyr was being used to describe him. But he was a man who excelled at dehumanizing people. Haitian immigrants, I could go down the list. That, and the need for bipartisan agreement to try to, he was conducting politics, democracy in the right way. So the concern is some of these very categories that you want to talk about, like humanity, the planet, I sympathize completely with, but those are the words that have been debased. It's been very hard for, I think, progressive rhetoric. The one I'm throwing out there as an alternative is interdependence, because to make the case for your self-interest in the fate of other people. That's the weak part of the exiteers. They think it's costless to them to leave a relationship of interdependence with other strangers. In fact, they're imposing a self-inflicted cost. The left, it's not a language the left tends to use. I'm kind of throwing it out there as an option to think in those terms that brings it down closer to the actors themselves than abstractions like humanity and planet, which I care about, but I'm also concerned about winning, okay, in democracy.
Just a small comment, because interdependence is a word Alexander von Humboldt used a lot to describe the world, the interconnectedness of the nature and the people. And I think that's a very good idea and it can be connected with those old ideas we shouldn't let go, I say. So because, that's actually what keeps us in this world and on this planet, that we are all interconnected. And those, I think, sie verstoßen gegen so eine Art von fundamental laws. What they're doing is destructive and will destroy themselves and all of us if we don't stop them.
And I do think this is where maybe the Hirschman, as the economist, had a blind spot to that. I'll have to think about that, but he still believed, this is the Hayek, he still believed that choosing was delinking from people and linking up with other people in some ways. That was the story of exile. Although, obviously, his memory of 1933 made him wonder whether maybe there was more cost to the exit option than he really realized.
Also ich glaube, dass Hirschman genauso wie Hayek und viele andere Ökonomen sowieso eine Anthropologie vertreten, die eigentlich nur eine einzige Unterscheidung kennt, nämlich Naturzustände versus soziale Zustände. Und was die so stark macht und was ich natürlich nicht teile, ne? Nicht, dass hier das Missverständnis aufkommt, dass ich in der Elon Musk-Kirche gründen möchte oder so. Also, was die so stark macht, ist, dass die überhaupt keinen Gedanken daran verschwenden, worin die soziale Konstituiertheit einer Gesellschaft besteht, sondern dass sie nach wie vor daran denken oder darüber so denken, dass sie sagen, die Menschheit ist in jedem Individuum und in ihrer Gemeinschaft nichts anderes als eine Ausbeutung der natürlichen Zustände, die auf dieser Erde, auf diesem Planeten geboten sind. Es geht um die Bewältigung von Knappheit. Ja? Und die Knappheit ist ein total natürlicher Zustand. Wenn Soziologen dann sagen, aber um Himmels Willen, jede einzelne Knappheit, über die wir reden, ist sozusagen eine soziale Erfindung, ne, wird durch Märkte produziert, wird durch Geldsummen produziert, wird durch Verknappung der Produktionsfaktoren und so weiter produziert, dann sagen die, nein, das ist genau das, was wir nicht glauben. Ja, sondern wir glauben, dass die Knappheit der natürliche Zustand des Menschen ist und dass es auf Einzelne, nicht die Gemeinschaft, ankommt, sich davon zu befreien. Ja, dieses elementar anarchistische Moment, dass jeder als Individuum daran glaubt, er oder sie könne sich davon befreien, was alle anderen bezwingt. Ja, das ist das, was dir im Moment, und ich rede wirklich von einer sozialen Diskurs, so wird einer Diskurskonjunktur, ja, einer Narrationskonjunktur, was die im Moment so stark macht. Debasing all other terms, as you said. Ja, so. Und ich glaube, dass es uns Progressiven gelingen muss, unsere eigenen Diskurse wieder mit einer gewissen, verzeihen Sie mir das Wort, mit einer gewissen Erotik aufzuladen, ja, die diesem Übermut, von dem ich eben gesprochen habe, was entgegensetzt. Ja? Denn wenn wir sagen, ne, genau wie du gesagt hast, Jeremy, wir reden hier über die Kosten, ja, wie langweilig. Ja? Sondern wir müssen darüber reden, welchen es ist so merkwürdig, es gelingt einem nicht, dafür die passenden Worte zu finden. Wir haben Spaß daran, in Wurzen in Sachsen einen politischen Prozess zu organisieren. Ja? Wer sagt das? Eine gute Bekannte von mir, jetzt fällt mir der Name nicht ein. Ich komme gleich drauf. Ja? Macht in dem ehemaligen Braunkohlegebiet südlich von Leipzig Kunstaktionen, in denen sie mit den Leuten, die da aus ihren Dörfern vertrieben worden sind und in irgendwelchen Plattenbauten drumherum mittlerweile siedeln, aber immer noch zum Knobeln zusammenkommen in bestimmten Kneipen, indem sie mit denen Folklore-Tänze übt, beziehungsweise aus der Art und Weise, wie die zusammenkommen und sich verzweifelt angucken, eine Form der tänzerischen Bewegung. Lisa Pauls, ja, der tänzerischen Bewegung zu machen versucht. Ja, die machen mit, und wir haben das jetzt gerade in Dresden, in Hellerau erlebt, wo sie das sozusagen mit uns ein bisschen reinszeniert hat, um ihre Arbeit dort vorzuführen. Und ich merke an mir, dass ich natürlich nicht mitgetanzt habe, ja, sondern dass das so eine Art ästhetischem Leerlauf produziert, wo man genau sieht, da will jemand das Richtige, aber er produziert eigentlich noch mehr Verzweiflung, weil man merkt, die ästhetische Überhöhung eines Folklore-Tanzes rund um die Seen des ehemaligen Braunkohlegebietes ändert überhaupt nichts an der Situation. Ja, die Leute sind froh, dass sie sich mal wieder gesehen haben, dass sie ihre Geschichten austauschen, dass sie sich fragen können, was macht denn die Tochter sowieso und so weiter. Aber ansonsten resultiert daraus überhaupt nichts in Form einer politischen Bewegung. Ja? So, und was ich nur sagen möchte ist, wir haben an dieser Stelle nicht unseren Blindspot, sondern wir können ja genau hingucken, wir haben an dieser Stelle unseren Schwachpunkt. Ja, unsere Achillesferse vielleicht oder sowas. Keine Ahnung, welches Bild da wirklich passiert. So. Und deswegen müssen wir über so Unterscheidungen, wie sie Hirschman verwendet, Gesellschaft, Markt, Staat, Natur, Kultur, sehr genau nachdenken, weil wir aufpassen müssen, dass wir sozusagen nicht die falsche Seite der Unterscheidung zu sehr besetzen, während die anderen mit Vergnügen auf der anderen Seite der Unterscheidung die Natur des Menschen, die Natur des Genies, die Natur der genialen Unternehmer etc. Herumreitet. Ja. Vielleicht noch ein letztes knappes Wort, ich weiß, das ist sehr spekulativ, aber ein letztes Wort noch zu dem Stichwort Freiheit. Ja, wenn Elon Musk und Konsorten das Wort Freiheit in den Mund nehmen, dann muss ich sofort an, wie heißt diese AI von Musk, Grok, denken. Ja? Warum? Weil es kann diesen Large Language Models eigentlich nichts Besseres passieren, als dass alle frei sind, keinerlei Institutionen mehr irgendeine Art von angeblich vernünftiger Ordnung schaffen, sondern wir es nur noch mit chaotischen Ereignissen zu tun. Die einen kaufen was, die anderen wählen was, die dritten gründen Familien, die vierten gehen zur Universität, in irgendeinem völlig individuellen, individualistischen, chaotischen, anarchistischen Zusammenhang. Und wer hat darüber den Überblick? Nur die Large Language Models selbst. Ja, sodass man sagen kann, dieser Faschismus, der da unterwegs ist ein Faschismus, der genau die Unordnung produziert, die von Large Language Models großartig bewältigt wird. Ja, und das ist eine Ironie, die möchte man gar nicht ausbuchstabieren.
Das möchte ich bestärken, weil es auch bewusst gewählt ist. Das hat Peter Thiel gesagt, der gesagt hat, wir brauchen nicht die Demokratie, um Leute zu überzeugen, wir machen das technologisch. Und das ist genau das, was du jetzt beschreibst. Aber das ist natürlich eine Aufgabe und das ist sozusagen das denen nicht glauben, dass das die Größe des Menschen befördert. Ja, beherrscht zu werden von Large Language Models macht uns, so klein kann ich das gar nicht zeigen hier vorne. So, das verzwergt die Menschheit. Also, wenn ich doch noch davon sprechen darf.
Ja, vielen, vielen Dank. Ich wollte euch auch die Möglichkeit zu reagieren. Vielleicht gibt es eine Frage oder einen Kommentar von euch. Ansonsten, Jeremy, I think we are almost at the end of our conversation. Jeremy, do you want to react to this example? And
well, I think so. I'll maybe react in a Hirschmanian way, which is to say, voice. Well, thinking hopefully, not. He made a distinction between thinking hopefully and wishful thinking. Wishful thinking really is pie in the sky, but thinking hopefully, partly because these systems that the supermen are making for us and let's say imposing on us are full of cracks and contradictions and inside them are possibilities for alternatives. But there's also work to be done on the outside. And I think, there is now a lot of self-reflection and criticism. I think some of it needs to kind of gather together. But one thing we have to confront, which is a hard one for us to confront, and it goes back to this language of openness versus closedness. Not just of the systems, but of the values that we talk about that guide them, which is that living in open societies was challenging. It ran the risk of too much voice. It created problems of decline in organizations, companies, states. But we were very identified with them. We, as progressives, were very identified with them. And I don't think we're yet at a stage now where we've done a lot of self-examination about what the problem of open societies presents to us in order to renew them and rejuvenate them. I think that the fact that we now have a battery of books and podcasts and discussions that are going at this means that we're on that track. But I think it's going to require touching on some cherished elements of the institutions that were built up, and to look at them in the cold, hard light of day. If we don't do that, we're allowing the supermen to do to capture the language that had been natural to the left, which was the language of critique. And this is the dilemma of the loyalist, right? The loyalist to law, loyalist to the nation, but that's what we'd spent our lives critiquing. Now find ourselves in a role reversal. So how to do both, how to be loyal to them and to critique them at the same time is a dilemma that progressives are going to have to start getting used to.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I see you're nodding. You're agreeing. So we leave it here for now. Thanks very much for coming. It was a very intense talk. Also greetings to the people who have been watching us on the live stream. And maybe we'll watch it later. And we continue then without the live stream and with you here drinking at the bar before we all exit. Thanks a lot. Am 7. November ist die Preisverleihung, das darf ich noch verkünden, hier im TAG. Und dann sehen wir uns spätestens dann. Vielen Dank. Tschüss. Jeremy, Dirk, Maike, vielen, vielen Dank.